You can avoid so much frustration by just not expecting yourself to go and be performing at your limit in a new style right away.
Hey y'all, welcome back to The Struggle. It's me, Ryan, your host. I'm psyched that you are here. I hope you're having an awesome day and an awesome week. Thank you for giving up a little bit of your time here to hang out with me and Coach Carly Rager, not Rager, although she is a rager, on and off the rock. We really dug into things in this conversation here around trip planning. And if you're like me, you're a weekend warrior, you've got a job, you got a family or school or other obligations, a career, and maybe you only get a couple weeks off a year to be able to do a trip. Maybe you're lucky, maybe you get more than that. We dove into this conversation today kind of through this lens of having a limited amount of time to take a trip and how we can make the most of that. And that includes the initial planning of the trip, where you're going, what your objectives might be, goal setting, and the 4 goals Carly recommends we all set before taking a trip. And let me tell you, those 4 goals, the 4 kind of buckets that she breaks these goals into, was an absolute eye-opener, game changer for me as it pertains to how I think about going on a trip and how I think about success while I'm on a trip and even then reflecting back on a climbing trip. So Carly is an expert on this stuff. She travels and climbs a lot herself. In fact, when we connected, she was down in Mexico. And I think she's still down in Mexico, taking on this really big objective down there. So we looked at her goals in those 4 buckets herself. And also as a coach, she has a ton of athletes that take trips. And the other coaches at Project Direct Coaching, her company, coach athletes all the time on how to make the most out of a trip. So whether you are planning your first climbing trip or you regularly travel to different destinations, I think this conversation here with Coach Carly is going to be really, really impactful for you as you look at your 2025 and beyond trip planning. And then at the end, a little teaser, a little extra carrot to dangle in front of you here. We answer listener questions, and one of them was about finger strength and the study that Carly did that looked at the importance of finger strength, or perhaps, as it turns out, maybe how unimportant finger strength is when it comes to the most impactful factors for leveling up as a climber. So stick around for that at the end. This one is banger. A quick little update from me over here. I got outside, it's February, and I got outside climbing at the Red with my daughter just recently, and it was like 55 degrees and sunny and amazing. Don't let people tell you that the Red isn't good in the wintertime, or let people tell you that. But I'll tell you what, if you're planning a trip, you have to be careful because the weather windows are unpredictable, but man, winter climbing at the Red's fantastic. Got out and did some volume, working on building that pyramid. I got the 2-pronged goal this year, build the pyramid and road to V8. So I'm just building a lot of volume out on rock right now, and I'm having a blast with it. Hope you're having a blast with your training and your climbing. And speaking of trips, I'm going to be taking a trip here to Portland, Oregon at the beginning of March. I'm meeting up with Emil Abrahamson. You know Emil, he's been a guest on our show a couple times. He has a massively popular YouTube channel, and he's flying out, and we're going to be shooting an episode of Struggling With together. So I'm going to be struggling with Emil Abrahamson at the Portland Rock Gym in Portland, and that's going to be in early March, and we're blocking out a time to do a little climb around for Struggle listeners. I think I'm going to do like a live Q&A podcast at the gym. We're going to be doing like a little mini comp. We're going to have prizes, and we'll do a special little climb around as well. So keep an eye on the Struggle Instagram if you want to come out. If you're in the Portland area or the Pacific Northwest and you want to do a little climbing, a little hanging out, maybe take part in one of the videos that we're doing, I'd love to see you out there. So I will post more about that on Instagram. I'm really psyched for that trip, and I'm going to be using a lot of Carly's tips as I plan for that trip because I think I'm going to sneak out to Smith Rock, weather permitting. Oh, I'm so psyched. And on that note, that's a perfect segue to talk about all things trip preparation, planning, and performance with Coach Carly Rager.
How's it going? Where are you right now?
I'm in Louisville, Kentucky,
Okay.
and we got like a foot of snow and everybody is freaking the fuck out and school has been canceled for the week and my life is absolute hell as a result. I grew up in Michigan, so like I know what snow is and I know how to drive in snow and nobody else here does. So it's like Armageddon.
Oh my goodness. And you have little ones, Anna said.
I do. I've got a first grader and a fourth grader, and they are not at all disappointed that every day of school has been canceled, in direct contrast to my wife and I being like, this is the end of the world. So
Being like on the edge of the abyss right
we're
now.
teetering because we're coming off of 2.5 weeks of winter break already. And so like we were like so ready. We were just mentally and emotionally prepared for them to go back to school. I love my kids, but I cannot handle this much of them. So
Dude, totally.
anyway, how's it in Mexico?
Well, it's actually really, really fucking cold here, and
Really? Like good
Yeah.
cold or not good cold?
like not good cold, which this is going to be my first podcast interview that I've done from my bed because I set up the computer and everything in the kitchen, and I like got all ready, and I was just like, I could like see my breath.
Whoa.
And I was like, yeah, I'm gonna boil. So I like put boiling water in an Nalgene and put it in the bed.
Yes.
I'm just literally taking it. But I'm just like, it's just really cold. So yeah, I'm in El Salto, and it's like, usually there's some cold snaps, in January. It just kind of happened that I got here. We had like one climbing day of like normal, like nice temperatures, and then it just like dropped. So it's like probably it's like maybe 35 degrees Fahrenheit.
Wow.
Right now. Yeah.
That's like condies for me though, at the red at least. I mean, if you're doing longer climbs, that's probably pretty uncomfortable, but like a single
Yeah.
pitch in the sun at 35 degrees, that's kind of primo. But maybe this is the beta, right? We're here to talk about trip planning, and maybe the beta is like make sure you have like insulation in the house that you rent so you don't see your breath in the kitchen.
Yeah, if only that was a thing in El Salto. I don't know if there's any insulated buildings, but yeah, we're talking about, I thought this was kind of funny because like I'm gonna be down here for a while because I have like some bigger objectives, but like just like the reality of you can't plan everything, like
Yeah.
you can try to optimize or like go during the right times or like, all this, that, and the other thing. And then inevitably something is going to not go like, as according to your like perfect plan that you came up with.
Oh, it's good. This is good. We're already diving into themes of this conversation, which I'm really excited about. Well, yeah, first of all, let me just ask you if you're ready to go or any thoughts or questions or anything.
The only thing I had to ask you is, did you send your project?
I sent the proj.
Nice.
I did it. Yeah.
I was laughing so hard listening to that episode with you and Anna.
I sent the proj. Hey, is Anna around?
No, she's going to make a cameo, but she went and climbed,
Okay.
so she's
Well,
not.
make sure you let her know that I sent the proj because I'm
Dude,
not sure I
I'll let
told
her
her
Yeah.
99 times yet that I sent the proj.
Yes. Still basking in the glory.
I don't know. I'm like half basking and half like, I haven't done anything lately. I need to do something. So you know how it goes. But yeah, I'm actually excited because I don't travel all that much as a climber. Most of my climbing is at the Red River Gorge, which is just kind of like my local crag, which everybody knows because I talk about it ad nauseum. But that's, kind of a direct result of being in this season of life where I've got some young kids and multiple jobs, and also the Red is freaking awesome. And so like no complaints there, but I try to do a couple trips a year and I don't seem to do the best job of like planning for them. Like oftentimes I just show up and I'm like, oh yeah, what should I climb on? And so I think this conversation and like the main theme around it, and it can wander, we can go in like any number of directions, but kind of this main theme around like, how do we best plan for and maybe prepare for, train for, or mentally, emotionally prepare for, and then like logistically prepare for a trip. And then when we're on the trip, like how do we make the most of that experience? I think that's going to be really helpful for me as I'm looking at my 2025 calendar and the couple trips that I'll be able to take, probably one bouldering trip and then one like either sport climbing or multi-pitch climbing trip. But actually, before we dive in, I want to cover like a few of like the struggle basics here. And
All
so
right.
why don't I have you do like a quick little just intro on yourself so that people who haven't worked with you or who don't know you can understand who you are a little bit as a coach and as a climber. Obviously, you're in Mexico right now. You maybe could share a little bit about your objectives there since we're talking about trip planning here. But yeah, tell us a bit about yourself, Carly.
Yeah, so my name's Carly Rager. Also, sometimes I'll go by Carly Rager because that's how you spell my last name.
Yeah,
so
and also
people's-
like way cooler. Sorry.
And like way cooler,
Yeah.
yeah. So sometimes I'll just like let people make that. It is like I'll just let them ride with that and go with the Rager vibe. But yeah, and I'm a climber and a coach. So I started Project Direct coaching in 2020. Prior to that, I was a structural engineer. So I took like a real big left turn in life in 2020. And I was a structural engineer for 4 years. And now I've been a coach for full-time coach and business owner for 4.5. So Project Direct Coaching is the business that I own, the coaching business that I own and run. And now we have 3 coaches, like a team of coaches, basically because I couldn't take any more athletes on. And then also because everybody has their own perspective and their own specialties, you know what I mean? And I think it's a little bit unrealistic for a single coach to be able to coach everything as well as they might coach their niche. So we're 4 coaches in total now, and that's what I do. That's my full-time job and has been for 4.5 years. So I talk to people a lot about trip planning and coaching throughout trips, and we work a lot on mindset and head game at Project Direct because we want people to feel fulfilled in their climbing and not just be the coaches that get you to like tick the next grade, but you like kind of fucking hate it. And like, you know, or like get really frustrated with the sport if you aren't like progressing, you know, exactly on whatever schedule you set for yourself. So
yeah,
we talk a lot about that in our coaching, and I think that will like play into and like fold into the conversation about trip planning really well, because when there's a trip and you're investing a bunch of money and time into like going somewhere new or going somewhere with a very specific objective, you know, and there's always something unknown comes up or something changes. And so kind of the way that we frame that will be good to talk about on this podcast and get a little taste of kind of what it's like to be coached by us and what we talk to athletes about. So, yeah.
Dig it. I'm really excited to dive in, and I've heard great things about you as a coach and also Project Direct. So congratulations on what you're building over there. And because we are going to be focused on trip planning, and because this is the struggle, I have to enter into this conversation through the lens of struggle. And where do you, Carly, struggle personally when it comes to your trip planning and maybe your climbing or training, you know, as it pertains to going on a trip? Or is it all just so easy?
I wish it was. It was. I think I struggle a little bit with like always feeling like maybe I'm a little bit behind of where I want to be, you know, or like always feeling a little bit like I'm a little rushed. And that's totally self-imposed, and I recognize that, but it's like something that I have to kind of keep in check, you know, and just be like aware of and not get down on myself. Oh, I wanted to one hang it by now, or oh, I wanted to send it by now, or like I'm in Mexico right now and I want to do an FA on a 14 pitch route and it's 35 degrees outside. So I can't even like, there's no way I can even go up to the climb. So I'm just like having to like do something else. But in my head, my natural instinct is like, oh, but you should be up there right now. You should be like working out the pitches and like doing this stuff. And I have to like kind of talk myself through that, like pretty much every trip I go on when I'm not going as fast or making, you know, whatever arbitrary progress I deemed as being like the right amount of progress in so much time.
I think climbers, just to overly generalize, but I think there's a good contingent of climbers that are very goal oriented and very driven and like to map out and plan different aspects of performance, and oftentimes there's some discomfort that can come from when expectation doesn't meet reality. And to your point with like weather and these kinds of things, sometimes you just have to figure out how to adapt. And so I'm sure we'll talk through that, the mindset side of going on a trip and preparing for a trip and the different outcomes. And I appreciate you sharing that struggle with us. I think let's just kind of dive in here and explore through your lens as a coach, how you work with clients who are preparing for a trip. And we can even maybe start at the beginning stages, which is like how one maybe identifies the right trip and objectives based on their lifestyle. And so I'm assuming you work with clients who come from a variety of different backgrounds. Some people have tons of time, tons of flexibility. Some people only get 1 or 2 weeks off a year from whatever full-time job they're on. So when we're looking at starting to explore what our climbing adventures, our climbing trips will be, how do you enter into those conversations with your clients?
So the first thing I think I like to start with people on is like, is this trip a like discovery trip? Like you're like learning a new style, you're coming better at the art of climbing? Or, or is this like we have a send goal, we're performing, and I think so often motivated climbers, like they just naturally swoop into like, if like for you, for example, like you climb at the red and you have like these goals and the style. And so when it's time for you to crank and like be in performance mode, like you kind of know what that looks like. And I think that's like the very first pitfall that I see most climbers get into when they're like, okay, they're like, I don't know, the big hoss on campus at the red or 10 sleep or like wherever their home zone is, because they've seen that style so much that it's like they have that pattern recognition and that like intuition about like they're going to see crux sequences and they're just going to be able to solve them very quickly.
Sure.
And then you can take like a climber like that has like, if we're talking about like weekend warriors that don't travel as much for climbing, they're good at their style, but then they're going to go to El Salto or Road AR or Lander for the first time. And it's kind of like slamming your head into a wall. You're like, holy shit.
Right. Why is this so hard?
Yeah, like I swear I'm a 5XX climber or whatever, but now I can't even onside this grade. And like, so I think you can avoid that by being like, if it's your first time to a place, like, and the style is different, is trying to plan 2 trips there, and I know everybody has different levels of like time that they can take and go on climbing trips, and everybody's lives are different. But like, even in the case of like, let's say, like I live in Boulder, and let's say I wanted to go to like the Red and I wanted to do some like sick project at the Red, I would totally go twice. I would go for like I'm going to learn the art of this style, how to read this rock, what kind of soft skills in terms of like pacing, resting, all of that like good stuff. And I'm going to go and I'm going to do like a volume trip or like get better at this style trip. And then I'm going to like come back for the, the project. And maybe even at the end of the like first trip, I get on the project. So I kind of know what I'm getting myself into. But style is so important. And if we're really from one area and we're trying to go to a trip to another area, is like, you can avoid so much frustration by just like not expecting yourself to go and be performing at your limit in a new style right away. So I think that's like the first thing I talk to folks about.
It's like such simple and clear advice, and yet so hard to like actually put into practice, at least for me. I remember the first time I went out to Vegas and like went up and climbed in the limestone up in the Clear Lake Cave and just, like 3 hung an 11B and then 5 hung a 12A, and I had just climbed my first 12D, and I just like, I was so, I don't know, like flummoxed. I was like, what's happening? What is this? What's going on here? And it was just like, a totally different style. Also, I was tired from traveling and it was a higher altitude, and like there was all these things that played into it that I just hadn't considered when I was looking at things on Mountain Project. And I do like the almost permission that you give yourself when you're saying, I'm going to plan 2 trips, even if you're not actually planning 2 trips, but just like mentally, you're like, there's going to be 2 trips here. In this one, I'm going to go and I'm going to sample all the local flavors and check some stuff out and not have some big send goals. And then the next trip might be for that. And so let's focus on that first trip if we can for a little bit here. And how do you like to then, quote unquote, kind of sample, or like if we can look at maybe like a bouldering trip versus like a sport climbing trip or something along those lines. But essentially, if you have not been to that area before, is there a recommendation of a pyramid that one might want to consider, or kind of how do you get out there and just have like a good fun experience that also maybe still pushes your limits in ways that on a performance side you can be really proud of when you come home?
Totally. Yeah. And I think like if we're really performance driven or like metric, like if we're a climber that's really driven that way, it can feel kind of like counterintuitive or hard to go on a trip where you're just going to do like a bunch of some lower grade things and be proud of it because maybe you want the grade. There's something that you have in your mind is like your grade. But I like this chess analogy where like I know the rules of chess, but like if anybody got me in a chess tournament, they'd be psyched. Like, because I can't. I'm like fucking terrible at chess.
Right.
Because when I see a chessboard, I see like, okay, there's all these rules and there's all these things that I can do. But like when somebody that's really good at chess sits down and they're like, they see that pattern. These patterns are like already unfolding on the table in front of them, and they're just able to like slide in there and do it. And basically when you're going on like these first trips and you're getting the local flavors and you're doing volume, is like it's like this necessary step to that pattern recognition and that automaticity that we see from really skilled climbers in those zones. So like sometimes like if that can help you feel like you're still making progress in that zone. And so I like to go and I just do like a grade ladder, I call it, for the zone. So I would start like if my project level is like 13 plus, I would like back off like 6 to 8 letter grades. So maybe I'd start at 12A. You know, and yeah, I have a lot of experience at 12A, but do I have a lot of experience at 12A here? Maybe not. So I just try to do like a 12A, B, C, like just like march up this little ladder. So you don't have to build out this whole pyramid and do, you know, however many 12As and 12Bs and, you know, and maybe you skip a couple letter grades. I don't know. But you kind of start lower, something that you maybe can on-site or do pretty quickly. And then you just slowly build up. And by the time you're up into 12 plus now, you're starting to read it pretty well, and you're like having a good time. And then maybe on that trip, if you stay long enough, you get up into your project grade, or maybe you get so far up in that ladder and then you're like, okay, I have to leave. And then when I come back, now I have all that pattern recognition that I can put to like the project or whatever your goal is for the second trip. And that's a way to have a lot of fun. I did that in Leavenworth this last spring, which I'd never been to, and I'm not the biggest outdoor boulder really, and so like I boulder all the time inside, but I went and did Leavenworth and I was just like, yeah, we'll just start at V3, do a bunch of them, then we'll do V4, V5, V6, and you know, and V7, and if we get to V8, sick, you know what I mean? But I got a really good feel of the style, and now I feel like when I go back to Leavenworth, I'm like, would try something harder than, you know, V7, V8, because I know what's going on.
Well, in my experience at Leavenworth, the V3s were friggin' hard. So
there is a couple of those.
I was like, oh my God, climbing on Granite, my fingers got all chewed up in like the first 2 hours. I was like, yeah. I don't know how to climb here in Leavenworth.
Yeah. The style matters. You get like, and then you watch the Leavenworth climbers that just start like Velcro on it, and you're like, what is happening?
It's so good.
You guys are incredible.
I ate my body weight in strudel there from the German bakery on the main street. So yeah, I really like that. I like the ladder concept. I think that's really smart. So you don't get bogged down doing a bunch of the kind of like the foundation of like what a pyramid would be, but it's essentially that's kind of what I've built as a sport climber, is like a skyscraper more so than a pyramid anyway. But you can kind of then, if you're getting stopped at a certain grade, regardless of like what the grade is, you just know like, okay, this is, if I don't want to spend 3 days on this one thing, I can back off and go back and have some more fun on some of these others. If you do have a project that's identified for that kind of theoretical second trip, would you pop over and suss that thing out a little bit? Or do you feel like, you know, that's just better to save for a different time?
I would totally get on it. And like, you know, just because this happens all the time where we're like, oh, everybody loves this climb XYZ, you know, and you get so many preconceived notions about if you love it or not. Or like, you know, and maybe you do or maybe you don't, but like I do think getting on it and like playing around, can I solve the crux beta? Is there any like clear limiting factor? Is there something that I'm just like, I just can't pull this kind of move, or I can't do this compression or something? That's really important information to have, because then you could, you know, in your training or with your coach, you can go back and be like, yeah, I was doing really great, but I just couldn't pull this one type of move. It also gives you the chance to be like, maybe you are really psyched on this, but maybe you're like, actually, now that I'm here, this other thing looks cool. You know what I mean? And you can try a couple things and not get like so pigeonholed into like what is the classic route or what one person one time told you should do. So you can still get a lot of information, I think, on that first trip and be like, okay, like maybe this is something I need to work on, or like, I love this climb, like I'm definitely coming back. But your primary focus is to start to be able to route read better and get all the soft skills of the area understood. I know like El Salto, where I'm at right now, that's like a big thing, you know, there's tufas, and there's like tufas to crimps and crimps to tufas, and you got to be able to set a knee bar and pace and rest, and it's pumpy, and it has a lot of these kind of things that are hard to just because you know that these are skills doesn't mean you have these skills. So like you can kind of like work on those skills and then also still try the proj, see if you're psyched, and let that psych like carry over into your training or whatever it is for your trip back.
Well, I think the psych level is usually sky high on a trip. And in my experience, when I don't have a whole lot of time, if I don't have 2 weeks or 3 weeks, I'm oftentimes not resting or not taking a whole lot of rest.
Yeah, totally.
And so in terms of kind of this first trip when you're coming in and you're going to be trying to taste the local flavors and sample a bunch of great stuff, maybe suss like something harder, there is this potential, I don't know, slippery slope where you just go over Stoker and essentially like climb yourself into a hole. And how do you look at rest on a trip? How do you coach your clients when it comes to at least that kind of like that first trip when you're not in like super projecting mode and you kind of the goal is to bounce around and maybe take as many fun climbs as you can?
That's a good question. I think that would also like me into a little bit like training for these two types of trips. You know, like if you were going and you're going on your first trip to the new or the first time you've been to, I don't know, Road AR, is like I would want to prep an athlete to just have a lot of capacity, which is a little different than like that project like kind of fitness, a lot of capacity, so that, you know, if you think you have a lot of capacity and you train that way, you can learn so much more in a day if you can do 5 pitches than if you can only do 2.5.
Yeah.
You know, and then on the trip, you know, if your goal is like learning and that's that first trip, is like I would push an athlete a little bit more, and, you know, it's okay to climb maybe a little more tired, you know, not to the point, you know, there's a tipping point on that, of course, but like it's not like on a project trip where you're like, okay, like we're really close to sending. We need to be well rested, well fed, like we want to be firing on all the cylinders, because then you're going to put that thing down. But like we're trying to learn as much as we can in 2 weeks kind of trip. I'm like, I want to send that athlete in with just like a lot of work capacity where they can just climb all day and hopefully climb, I always say like 4 or 5 pitches a day. If you're like in a learning mode is a great goal. You don't have to send all of them, but like you want to be able to climb that much so you can get as much learning out of that trip as you can.
That makes a lot of sense. And you don't want to climb yourself into a hole. And so it sounds like in that prep phase, you're willing to sacrifice maybe a little bit of the top end power, a little bit of the top end strength in order to have that capacity so you can just do multiple pitches, multiple days on. Can you walk me through just a general, you know, if I'm going to be heading out to 10 sleep this year as a trip for, I don't know, 10 days or something like that, how would you recommend that capacity training or like that training for that trip? And we could pick a different destination too, it doesn't really matter, but like essentially for somebody who's going to be spending maybe a week or week to 2 weeks somewhere, what would that training look like leading up? And then how much rest are you recommending we take before we actually get in the car or get on the plane?
I do like to have like a 3-day kind of like chill out period if you're like heavily training before a trip, so you can like show up not cashed.
Right.
But I think in the case of wherever it would be, is I'd try to, as much as I can, given what the athlete has, is get them climbing a lot of capacity on that hold type or that terrain angle. So if somebody was like, I'm going to 10 sleep, you know, I probably wouldn't have them doing as much steep bouldering before the trip. But a capacity workout in whatever style that they might be doing is going to be, you know, instead of going in and having this like hour-long limit boulder session, you know what I mean? Let's say your limit boulder is a V6, just for, you know, is like, I want you to get on the hold style and I want you to do like 20 V4s. Can we do that in a session? You know what I mean? And kind of, and that'll depend on the athlete. But like for like an example, like I was doing before I went to El Potrero Chico, I was doing like 25 V6s on the filter board in a session.
Wow.
And it was because I needed to be able to like climb all day. And then with my outdoor sessions, I was trying to do like whole crags. You know, it's like I wanted this like capacity before I went to this place where I didn't know the style, so I needed to be able to climb all day. So finding like it can be as simple as like whatever, back off your project limit boulder, you know, and you're doing a lot more of those boulders. And that's for somebody that doesn't have rope access, because you are going to have to be pushing and climbing tired, you know, and still being able to climb well, to climb V4s when it's your 20th V4.
Yeah. And
focusing on the skills and the focus and sort of the mental toughness of that, you know, I think is like an important piece. And then, you know, we'd have rope climbing in there, but it would depend on what this person has access to too. And it would be in a similar theme where instead of being like, want you to do your 12 plus gym proj, You know what I mean? I'd be like having you do a lot more volume, just slightly below your tactical limit. So you can really just build that work capacity.
Cool. So yeah, and all of this makes sense. We're building our capacity so that when we get there, we can just enjoy more climbing. But while we're there, and let's say it's a 10-day trip or somewhere around that length, it'd probably be hard and maybe not recommended, I would think, to go 10 days on. And we all need different amounts of rest, I think, based on our training age and our physical age and just, what it's very individualized, but maybe you can speak to some generalities or cite some different kind of client types on whether we're doing half days or full days or a couple days on, 1 day off. How do you typically like to coach a client who's super hyped and they're spending money and they want to make the most of this trip, but you also don't want them to get wrecked?
Yeah, if somebody's like, they're like out the gate and I know they're healthy and they don't have any like lingering things that we're worried about, I'd say like 2 days on, 1 day off for at least that first week or so, and then you're going to have to feel in your body where you're at. And if you need to switch to 1 day on, 1 day off. I also like to if you're going to go 2 days on, 1 day off is try the harder things on the day after the rest day. If there's that one route that is the potential project route, and you want to try that. And if some other things, try that, do your harder routes. And then that second day is purely volume and learning, and you can do that for a while. And maybe you do need then to kind of back off and go 1 day on, 1 day off, even if you're in really good shape. But then you can get all the energy out too. You get somewhere and you're just let's go. I want to climb everything that is around me. I want to touch that. I want to do this. I want to do this. And you can kind of get that, get that going a little bit too. So that's kind of what I would have people. I'm let's start with the 2 day on, 1 day off. And then as you get either further into the trip or more set on a project or something, then switching to every other day. If you're in project mode or if you're on that second trip and you're this is the route that I am here for, then it changes. But 2 days on, 1 day off, I think when you're in that learning mode is really great.
This episode is supported by PhysiVantage Nutrition, and I've been using PhysiVantage since long before there was ever even a podcast. I've been a paying customer for many years now. It tastes the best, and it does the best for me and supporting my goals in my training, my recovery, and my performance. As a rock climber, I'm sure you all are familiar with their products. Their athlete team is crazy, from Alex Magos to Jonathan Segrist, Amity Worm to Daniel Woods, and so many other crushers out there are using PhysiVantage regularly. And that's because it works. I use their supercharged collagen every day before I train my fingers or I go climbing. I use their vegan PowerPlex protein, which tastes incredible. The chocolate flavored protein that PhysiVantage makes is just crazy. That's like my sweet treat that I have at the end of every day. I'll either mix it up with some water or milk, or I'll mix a scoop in with my plain Greek yogurt. And it tastes like chocolate pudding. It is so, so good. And then recently, because I've been trying to build up that endurance for my long, pumpy climbs out here at the Red, I've been using a lot of their Sendurex, which is like a beetroot extract. It's highly concentrated. It is science-backed to help support the endurance system. And I'm feeling like I'm climbing longer and harder and also recovering faster when I'm using PhysiVantage products. So I think you're going to love it too. If you haven't tried it, you can get 15% off your order over at PhysiVantage.com using code STRUGGLE15. If you're looking to level up your training, your recovery, and your performance, I have really felt the difference using this stuff for the past few years. And I think you will too. Check it all out at PhysiVantage.com and use code STRUGGLE15 to get that discount. I just want to take a quick second here to talk about how I'm keeping track of all my training and climbing over the course of days, weeks, months, and years. And I'm using an actual physical analog journal, a paper journal that I'm holding in my hands right now, called the 5-Year Training and Performance Journal. I created this. I've been using something like this for the last 9 years, and it's a reflective journal, meaning I put something in for every single day. And at the end of the year, the next year starts back underneath that first one. So that as you go, you are able to see where you were at 1 year prior, 2 years prior, 3 years prior. You can log your goals at the beginning of every month and see what you checked off. And then the big breakthrough for me is that I'm able to reflect back and see what training interventions are actually working, what are worthwhile, and maybe which ones aren't. And I'm also able to see with a ton of gratitude and joy how much progress I've made. And I've never been able to get that from training apps. I like training apps. They help me to do my training, but this reflective journal has totally changed how I'm able to understand my personal training, my performance, and then everything that I do as a climber, like all my notable routes that I've sent, all my thoughts and dreams, they're all in here. And I get to look back and enjoy that day after day and year after year. And now you can too, because I made it and I'm selling it. And for $40, I think that's probably the cheapest thing you could buy that will last you 5 years as a climber. You can learn more over at thestruggleclimbingshow.com/journal. Are you peppering in any or recommending that we pepper in any supplemental training while on a trip if we're just climbing outdoors in terms of just staying healthy, injury-free, or if weather comes in and we're not able to get out a little bit? How do you look at training while away?
I think definitely if there's like a PT MO that's good, and there's like something specific for the athlete and they have a PT regimen, is like sticking with that. For a 10-day trip though, I'm like, put all that effort on the wall. We came all the way out here, we can do hanging leg raises and everything like that till the cows come home when you're at home. But I'm like, I've had athletes ask me this. They're like, first time to, wherever. And they're like, should I be doing like core circuits or like, should I keep up my pulls? And I'm like, yeah, if you're there for 2 months, maybe I'd be like, all right, let's but I'm like, if you have enough energy after, 3-4 routes to do like core circuits and training, like I want you to go to onsite another 11. I want you to go and continue to become a better climber with that like last bit of energy that you have. And that is like my personal opinion and take, because like I see how much the skills and the pattern recognition and that soft stuff really matters, especially in like sport climbing sending, that I'm like, nah, you save those pull-ups for later. We'll do those when you're home. Go rest and pace through pump and breathe through pump for me on like one more route.
Yeah, it's hard for us climbers too. We always are so scared that we're going to lose whatever gains we made, even while we're literally out climbing. So it's like,
yeah,
it's a mental crux that we have to fight through and be like, okay, Carly told me I'm not allowed to do any core work. Yeah. And speaking of that though, are there certain types of training or work that you tend to pull out from climbers' programming as a trip is leading up?
Before a trip, I do think like, just like it sounds obvious, but like foundationally, like, are you healthy? Are you like out partying? Like, are you like, could you not for a little bit?
Right.
Like, can you like make sure all of just like the super obvious, like basic level health things are in line? I think sometimes that gets skipped over. So I think that's like one thing. Or like, are you like incredibly stressed with work? Like that all kind of like leads into how you're going to feel. Like you can't just live like, you want to live in the way that you think you're going to be your best self, I guess, and before you go on the trip, and so like maybe that is moderating some of your vices beforehand, or just making sure that your work stress is low, your relationship stress is low, like taking care of that stuff before you also go embark on and totally change up your routine. Which is automatically going to change things for you, I think is important. I think in terms of like, what do I pull off before a trip? I would start to pull off like any sort of strength stuff that's fatiguing. You know what I mean? We really like, strength takes so long to get. It takes a long time to lose too, like the detraining fear that you're talking about, like 3 weeks, like you're not going to lose that much strength, if hardly at any, like if you're going on a 6-week trip, yeah, okay, maybe we want to somehow get some supplemental training in there, but like for 3 weeks you aren't going to lose anything. And so like leading up to it, I'm like tapering. Maybe I'm whatever lifting we were doing, it's less often, and we're going down to some lower reps. If we're doing like 4 or 5 reps per set, I'm bringing us down to like 3 reps, kind of like maxing that out a little bit before, and then the week leading up to the trip, we're not getting into those like deep fatigued states, so that way you're feeling recovered.
And would this be, when we're talking about strength training, everything from like heavy, like max hangs to, are we talking like, deadlift, bench press, squats, like full body strength training as well?
Yeah. And especially the like tapering off the full body, you know what I mean? And like, cause we can be doing, maybe we're doing some endurance, but like, I'm trying to not send you on your trip fatigued.
Right.
Like that would, or like in such a fatigue state where you feel like you need a rest day when you get there. Like I want to like, it's your trip time. Like, this is the time where you need to, like, we're going to pull back all of the formulaic stuff and you're going climbing and you're doing all of that. And so that's my take on it, is that, the focus should be 100% on what's going on out at the crag. So you can take all of that good stuff home with you.
Well, let's kind of juxtapose that with what is theoretically like the second trip, where we're projecting. We've had the trip. We've built a little bit of a ladder, maybe sampled 1 or 2 projects. We've gone home. We've trained for them, maybe specifically in mind, because we know the moves now. We know the cruxes. We know the style, and now this trip is focused on going out and like doing that thing, that famous climb that we've, had pinned up on our wall for a while.
Yeah.
How does that change any preparation that's done? And then we can get into kind of what happens once you're actually on the ground.
Yeah, I think a part of the preparation for something like that, well, you're going to have to, like, specifically, what is your limiting factor? You know what I mean? Like, I know there's been times where I'm like, yeah, it's literally my, like, I can't do that move, or like I can't compress in that way, or it's endurance, so like whatever the limiting factor that we took away from that first trip, you know what I mean? Whether is it power endurance because you're pumped in your forearms? Is it power endurance because your back is powered down? Are you dropping core tension and letting your feet slip when you get tired? Is that your thing? So like, whatever it is that we've really like pigeonholed and we're like, this is the target, you know what I mean? And it's like, you're learning how to keep core tension when you're tired better than you maybe would normally, which is required on a lot of resistance routes or something like that. So I think that there has to be like that. If we're really going on a trip for like a project, we do want to gear our training towards the limiting factor that we figured out. And then I also talk a lot with my athletes about like the mental process of going into something when there's a lot of expectation, and how we can go after that with like the hunger and the like, I'm gonna fucking go for it, that we need. But also, how do we temper that and find the balance of like, okay, but it's inevitably not going to go perfectly. And so we talk a lot about, like, in addition to training your limiting factors, is I have athletes when they're going on that kind of trip, like the send trip, I have them make goals at least in 4 categories to help kind of smooth the rough edges of what that can bring up. So we have our send goal, like you want to send whatever it is, the route that you want to send. But I also have athletes make like a movement goal, a mindset or head game goal, and then also like a community or like a interpersonal goal about the trip.
Cool.
And that seems to be really effective in helping, I don't know, keep the rough edges of what can happen when you're really, really driven for climbing and you're, experiencing the natural struggle that will occur.
So in that sense, if you don't send the thing, you may have reached a goal for movement, or you may have reached a goal for just experiencing the local culture. So you're coming back with more than, it's not just a binary success on a trip. I sent or I didn't send. You're preparing people to have successes in various areas, and maybe the send happens or doesn't.
Yeah, exactly. And where I want to drive people is like, what is fulfillment in climbing? How do we get that? And like, so with that, it might be, I don't know, a good head game goal might be to try actually your fucking hardest. You know what I mean? And like, and this is actually one of mine for this year, because I feel like when I started climbing, I had like so much tenacity. Like I was just like screaming and going for it, and like, moving through the grades in that way. And I was just like, had so much fire, and it was awesome. I wasn't the best climber, but man, I fucking tried so hard. Yeah. And then I kind of hit this spot where I was like, okay, now I want to get better and like understand movement more, and like all the little nuances and the little things and all the things that make us good and skilled. And in that, I feel like I kind of lost maybe a little bit of just like absolutely balls to the wall, like trying as hard as I can. And so now I'm kind of back to that. And I'm like, one of my goals for like my trip is like, I want to try like fucking hard.
Yeah.
And because that's one of the things, when I think of the things that I love about climbing, is I love that feeling of trying it, just everything you have, and like, that's one of my mental goals. And like, there can be so much joy in that. And maybe I send some things, and maybe there's some things that are saved for later, but like, that's one of my buckets basically, is like a head game goal.
If you don't mind, I'd love to actually just explore these kind of 4 quadrants or these 4 like pillars of goals a little bit more. I think there's something really valuable here. I know for me and the way my mind works, because I'm goal oriented, but the goal doesn't always just have to be like a thing, like ascend, or I want to on-site this grade or whatever. So I really want to tease this out a little bit more. So maybe we can look at because you're on a trip right now. If you're willing to share a little bit more, you've already mentioned, I think the send goal is this FA of this big wall, it sounds like.
Yeah. So there is, my friend has put up 2 lines on this feature. It's called La Gloria. And there's a lot of story behind it. And there's actually an article about it in the zine right now, if you read the climbing zine.
Yeah.
But it's on La Gloria and it's all bolted, but it's unsent. And so like, that's the send goal. You know, we want to like bring that thing to the finish line. And me and my friend Mango, who's local here in El Salto, are going to go for it. And like, it's going to be an adventure for sure. Because there's unknowns, the approach is heinous, there's stuff going on. So that's like that's what I want. You know, that's like
so the big send goal is this FA, and outcome is uncertain. It sounds like it's it's a big goal to take on. Do you then also have other quote unquote send goals? Are there other side projects or routes, or do you try to keep it to kind of one goal in each of these quadrants?
I try to keep it to one. I mean, I do have, it's very cold right now, so like we can't go up on the mountain, so I am climbing on the ground, and there's a route called Fuerza Seville, which is a 13D that I'm like, well, eventually I want to do this. So it's like, it's kind of my side hustle right now, but like the minute the weather clears up, I'm leaving that and I'm going up on the mountain. You know what I mean? Like I have kind of like the one that I really want. So I have like, that's like the send goal. And then I mentioned like my like head game goal or mindset goal is like actually try really hard. Like I feel like in the last year, I'm like, I've done a lot, but I'm like, did I really try my absolute hardest? And like, I don't know. So I want to like play in on that. And then let's see, then like community goals. So like, you know, I want this, in my case, I want this like FA to just feel like this really good, it's safe, but we're psyched, you know, we want it, but we're not forcing it. Like it's the good feels of like what an adventure with a good friend should feel like. And that's very multi-pitch, you know, like multi-pitch has a way of making people closer and bring people together, and like you're up there and you're having this experience. So just kind of like that closeness that brings is a part of my goals. But this is good. I'm like, you're like, what are your goals in your quadrant? And I'm like, okay, movement goal.
Yeah.
And
so movement is the 4th.
4th.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah. And movement goal. And so with this, I do push people, and I'll push myself here too. But like I push people to be pretty specific. They're like, I want to get better at overhanging terrain. I'm like, you want to get better at turning your hips to reach further? You want to get better at dead pointing? You want to get better at a scorpion kick? Or do you want to get better at breathing through pump? Like there's so many skills that go into overhanging terrain. So I try it, like, I'm like, we have to be kind of specific, you know what I mean? And so, so I guess movement skills for me, then I noticed in EPC when I was like 9 pitches up that I was moving a little slower due to the exposure. I wasn't climbing quite as flowy as I feel like I do off the ground. So I think I would say like when I'm on pitch 11, like I want to like move and pace and breathe like I know how I can. And so that would maybe be my movement, you know, like climb up high as I would climb would be mine. So yeah, I'd like set these like, you know, we have these like 4 quadrants, and like there's so many directions and different ways you can go with each of them, you know, depending on the athlete. Maybe we do you next for yours. But then like I'll like take a look at that, and there's been trips where I do get the send goal and I'm psyched and I get a couple more of the other goals and I'm like, sweet. And there's been trips where I don't get the send goal and I'm like, okay, but like super tight with my homies, like that climbing partnership feels so good right now. And I learned how to move with momentum way better. That was the case for my Road AR trip. And I like those things, it felt very successful for me.
Right.
And then you can walk away and be like, I am without a doubt a better climber, even if I didn't get like that one send this time.
No, I really like that. I think that's a great way, just as climber, you know, 99.9% of the people listening to this right now are just climbing for joy and fulfillment. And we put pressure on ourselves, but it's all mostly self-imposed, you know, like we don't have big sponsors who are like, you got to go do the thing. So we tell ourselves we got to go do the thing, but it's also nice to have these other things that we can not just feel good walking away with. It's not like a consolation prize, but actually go in with those in mind. And that's not something that I've done. I've gone out with some objectives in mind or like no objectives in mind and then just like kind of create them on the fly. And then maybe after the fact, I'll reflect back and be like, oh yeah, I really had a great time doing this, or I saw this thing. But there's more thought, there's more intentionality to actually identify these things before going on the trip so that you can work towards them and also celebrate them when they happen. So I really like that. Let's stay focused on the objective for a second, the main goal, the send goal, because on this trip, in this scenario, we are trying to put our all into that. And we have these other goals as well. But in terms of like performance, we've got this one thing in mind. And it's going to look a little bit different than that first trip when we're going out there for volume. So is there a bigger emphasis on rest or some projecting tactics that you like to think about when you're on this kind of, it's still a trip, you're still away, you're still out of your element, you've got finite time, the clock is ticking, so you might be feeling a little more pressure than if it was just a backyard project. So how do you look at trying to get the stars to align for the send while you're there for maybe 2 weeks?
I think the first and probably most important thing is make sure you got a partner that's either psyched on that, I don't know, either just at that crag or maybe you're working the same project, or maybe they're on a different crag, but you got something figured out with your partner, you know what I mean? Where you're like actually going to be consistently like able to get on that thing every other day.
Right.
Or whatever it is. And so make sure that's dialed and you're not just like going to show up with a group of people and then, oh shit, it turns out they all want to go to this other spot. And you're like, no, I spent like 6 months thinking about this thing. And now I like, so just like some of the basic stuff like that, I think. And yeah, I think that once that beta is dialed, rest becomes like very important. If you're in a situation where you do know all the beta and we're putting in like burns, you know what I mean? Make sure those burns are really high quality. And so working through not being drawn, this is your time to put blinders on and not be like, oh, I'm going to try this other thing and go here and go here and go here. Is like, do try to like give yourself your rest, give yourself your 3 burns on the project and let that be your day. And I think that's an important thing too. I think with the timing and the nerves, that can really get into people's head if they really know that like, and I mean, what a mind fuck, right? You're like, all right, we're going to do this sport where like, it's really important for you to be like super focused, super at one with yourself in the moment, super flowing. It's beautiful. And you get there on a trip and you're like, day 1, you're like, I got 6 days to do this.
Yeah.
It's like, that's pretty hard. And that's a pretty hard thing to do. I think at that point, like you do maybe want to give yourself some intermediate goals, you know what I mean? And be like, all right, like it's going to depend on the route, I'm sure. But like you want to get to here. This is your first link. You want to low point the route, if it's like a progressive route, you don't want to just be falling at the same place over and over. So maybe you're working the route like top down. So you're like, okay, I have, let's say it's a 10 pitch or a 10 bolt route. And you're like, okay, this is where I'm falling. It's like, okay, now we're going to send bolt 6 to the top, bolt 5 to the top, bolt 3 to the top. And you're going to be giving yourself like these intermediate points. So every go isn't just like a send go until you've kind of established, all right, I am actually really close. And so that can play into too. So like good projecting tactics. Yeah,
like projecting tactics as we might implement just at our local crag, but it's just more concentrated. It sounds like, kind of going in, you're going to want to hit certain benchmarks. This is something as a coach you would probably work with your clients on very specifically, like let's take a look at the route and let's see how we can break this thing down for those of us who are self-coached. To your point, maybe not show up if it's a limit project, show up on day 1 and like be making attempts, red point attempts from the ground, but really put the time in. To your point, you're saying once you've got beta fairly dialed, once you are doing all the moves bolt to bolt or making some links, at that point in time, you want to make sure your actual red point attempts are very well recovered. And that can be hard, I think, on a trip when, again, the clock is ticking and maybe you're with a crew and they're really stoked. So it's going to take some discipline, some like mental and emotional discipline to show up when you're ready and maybe not try to push it too far. but can you be fully rested on a trip? I mean, I don't know. How do you draw that line yourself, and how do you talk to clients about that when maybe your best rested attempt would require 2 or 3 days of rest, but shit, that might be a full day that you don't get to climb. You know, if you got 5 days left, like you start to battle like this trade-off of time, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I mean, I think if it's, I guess to be frank, like if you're like really like, oh, I'm like struggling to like, if you have like FOMO or like you're struggling to not climb and you know when you're going to be rested, is like you're either out of alignment with your goal, you know, or you're undisciplined. And like being at either of those is worth talking to somebody about, you know what I mean? If you're just like, I want to go climb this other thing, or I want to like keep giving it burns when I know I need to rest, you know what I mean? Is like, well, you know, you're giving a little more credence to your whims in that moment than what you said you want. Then nobody likes it when I say that, by the way.
Oh, some real talk right there, Carly. I like that.
Yeah,
I feel like you're like staring through me right now. You're either out of alignment with your goal or you're undisciplined. Fuck, that's like, whew, that cuts. Yeah. That cuts deep.
Yeah, and I say it with like a lot of love, you know what I mean? But like which one is it? Because then we can like work through it from there. And we don't have to be disciplined. Like, right, we chose this goal. This is a voluntary thing. But when the tires hit the road a little bit, sometimes it's a little harder in the moment, right? And that's why it's important to have that outside perspective, and so helpful, I think, to also, if you are working with a coach, to work with the coach through your trip. And maybe this also highlights a little the difference between like a coach and a trainer, because a lot of people will come to us and like, I'm going on this trip, I want to train, you know what I mean? I want to train 3 months to the trip, and then I leave on the first, and then like and then that's when they want to like stop working with us or something like that. And then there's some folks that are like, we just have this relationship, we just kind of are always working together. And I think it's in their mind, it's like a training up to a trip, but so much of the coaching that we do will happen on the trip. You know what I mean?
Right.
And you think about like the Olympics, like Yanya didn't like leave her coach. The coach is at the event, you know, and so that outside perspective, I know that I appreciate like from my coach when I'm on the trip, and also is important for you to have, and sometimes lovingly call you out. Like, okay, like, is this really what you think is the right thing right now? Or are you getting sidetracked? And have somebody kind of act as the, I guess, little bumpers, you know, of kind of like pushing you back into the lane that you've wanted for yourself.
And how does that work with you and the other coaches at Project Direct? Are you doing phone calls? Are you doing, you know, just sending messages here and there? Like, what does that cadence look like?
Yeah, it's a good question. So it depends on, we have like 2 levels, well, like of support. So one includes Zoom calls. So like we have a Zoom call every other week. And then we'll be checking in and sending you messages like over True Coach. And then we have like a second level, it's like a level 2 where it's just like weekly check-ins, you know, so we'll get to look at your progress through the week, and like, you know, the more athletes share, the more we can then coach, you know, and then we're just like messaging back and forth and talking about it. If it's like, depending on the route, you know, sometimes we're looking at video and having movement conversations in that as well. And I'll like do a little like Loom video and like share with them what I'm seeing in their movement or something like that. But sometimes it's just, you know, a little more like journal entry like, you know, and when we really get to know athletes, which is like our favorite, you know, they're pretty open with us on like what's really going on. And you can like kind of like get in there before things go too far off the rail one way or the other and be like, remember this?
Yeah.
And then and just be that like trusted objective point of view.
Yeah, that level of support sounds highly valuable, if nothing else, just emotionally, as we're off somewhere and just like totally spiraling. It's always good to have somebody to helps kind of like pull us back. I'm curious about other aspects of being, you know, we've talked a lot about kind of the projecting tactics, the planning of a trip, how to break down some route goals. But then there's a lot of other things that go into being on a trip, from where you're sleeping and how you're sleeping and eating and hours and, you know, what you're doing on rest days. And you take a lot more trips than I do, and you work with a lot of clients who take more trips than I do. If I'm taking 1 or 2 trips a year, I feel like there's opportunity to probably identify ways to make the trip outside of the time that I'm tied into a rope or pulling onto a boulder that much more conducive to helping me to achieve my goals. And just what have you learned yourself or with your clients over the years that have been like little hacks or areas of opportunity when we're not actually on the rock?
I think we all have certain things and certain like aspects of our day that make us feel grounded. You know, I have one of my friends, like she goes on a morning walk every morning and that's just like her thing, you know what I mean? And for me, it's like coffee and reading a chapter of my book every day. You know, there's like these little, I guess they might be like tastes of home or like, you know, things where you're like, that's like my thing that like centers me and grounds me, is like trying to bring that on your trip. You know, maybe it's meditation, maybe it's just like really good food. Maybe you're just like, if I, you know, and there can be these different like kind of creature comforts that we can bring and prioritize, which I think is really good and helps us feel a little more like we're still ourselves and like still have some like little polka dots of routine like sprinkled in, so we don't just throw like everything to the wind. But it's tough, and like depending on the kind of climbing you're doing, like if you're doing more adventurous climbing and you're, you know, not necessarily in a place that's like really well serviced, you know, like I'm in El Salto right now and like nutrition is hard here. Like the closest grocery store with like full groceries is like an hour and a half away.
Right.
And I have like memories of my first, and I actually looked at some photos of like my first couple trips down here, and it was just like, damn, get that girl a hamburger. Like, shit. It's like now I do bring like protein powder and things like that to like help, because if you're on a trip and you're really going after it like if you're doing that 2 day on 1 day off schedule, or your body needs like a lot of nutrition at that point. So I do try to prioritize that, but also just those little, you know, those little things that you do at home that are like peaceful little things, is like, can you bring those with you?
No doubt, if you're working on a 14 pitch route, you're crushing through calories in any given day. So it makes sense that you need to replace those. And that is interesting. You know, I at least have a tendency when I'm out on a trip to run it pretty thin, because there's just like so much excitement and you're just kind of like fueled by the stoke, and likely I'm kind of like under replenishing my nutrition. And then usually there's beers at the end of the day. And so it's not like the quiet, healthy performance living that I'm doing at home when I'm in a training block. It's, you know, it's a little bit more exciting, which is fine because you're off on a trip and it's like really, really exciting. But I can see that could be a slippery slope, but just in terms of if one is wanting to perform.
And I think, I mean, shit, like we can do anything for 7 days, you know what I mean? So like, if it
Right.
is like, I don't know, you got to kind of think about but as trips get longer or they get into more remote locations, you will miss some things. And it's like really nice to try to like include those, but why not just also include them in the 7 day trip, I guess is kind of my thought, is like, if there's 2 things that you can do that just kind of keep you a little bit grounded, then I think that's a really cool thing. And if you're in like performance mode, like you are putting your body physically through something, but you're also putting yourself mentally and emotionally through something. And especially in like single pitch limit sport projecting, you know what I mean? There's a lot that like you hold that, you know, and so some grounding things can be really helpful.
Yeah, let's talk about some specific actual like locations and some areas that maybe you see your clients most often going to, just, you know, maybe like the hit list, the most popular climbing areas around, and we can maybe do a few in the States and a couple internationally. But I'm curious how one might prepare differently for some of these. So I'll hand it off to you. You know, we're recording this right now in the winter time. And so we can kind of look at it seasonally, some bouldering destinations and some sport climbing destinations. What are the most common trips that your clients are going on or that you like to go on?
Lots of trips to Ten Sleep, Vegas, the Red. Those are like some big, you know, people like Ten Sleep is more in the summer, you know, Red is spring and fall, Vegas in the winter. I feel like those are big ones. With the exception of the Red, I've spent a lot of time in Ten Sleep and in Vegas. So like one of the things that I do really like is when, you know, I've coached a route and done a route, or like people are coming to El Salto and I'm like giving them specific recommendations and I can like glean into my own experience. You don't necessarily have to do that to coach a route, you know?
Right.
But there's this added level of understanding when I'm like, okay, you're in 10 sleep for 10 days. I know where you're staying. I know what that route is like to hang out under. I know the vibe of this. Like, you just have that more complete understanding. So that's always like really fun. You know, people are like, I'm going to do gat crack in Vegas. I'm like, yes. Okay. Are you going to use the hand jam? People are like, you know what I mean? And like, I can really know what routes people are going on and doing. But sorry, I got totally sidetracked there. I was just like reminiscing in my brain about like some really fun trips. But
oh, that's great. No, I mean, I think, you know, for those who are listening right now that maybe are on the newer side of climbing or have been climbing a lot in their local gym, but they're excited to plan some trips. 10 Sleep, Vegas, the Red, those are, for those who live in the States, fairly accessible. They've got great seasons. There's accommodations. I've been to Vegas multiple times in the Red. I haven't been to 10 Sleep, but I'd like to make it out there this summer. And do you look at a specific area and say, oh, the style of this is crimpy and vertical, or this is super overhung, and then loosely try to build some training around that? Or if it's a first trip, you were talking about essentially generally building some capacity. It'd be nice to maybe explore a couple of these areas. And like, if you're coaching me and I'm going to be taking my first trip to 10 Sleep, what should I, be doing, do you think, leading up to that?
I like this question. So yes, the answer is yes. Like I do try to prepare people for the specific area. But one thing that I try to do that I think is really important too is that like skill preparation. So like you're going to 10 Sleep, like I'm going to give you you're going to have some time on pockets, and that's like just nice for injury prevention and things like that. But I'm also going to have you doing some skills that are like specific to 10 Sleep, and so like whether it is like really knowing how to stand up out of a perch and like redistribute your weight to your feet after a move or something like that I think you're really going to use when you go up and you stand up to this Crosley shenanigans hold. But then you hold on to it a second and get a foot up, and then you need to transfer your weight back onto your foot because like there's no way you're actually just using one hand in the Spock pocket shit.
Right.
You know what I mean? And so it's like I try to prepare folks in terms of like the physical, like, yes, like we want to, leading up to the trip, have the kind of power endurance that translates to that spot. But also like every athlete I work with, we have like a skill play time basically, where they're like playing with a skill and I'm like trying to get them to be thinking about something. I'll try to gear that towards the place. So like if it were road AR, you know what I mean? Like we're not doing a lot of crimping. We're doing a lot of momentum-based swinging type of movement. And so like your skill work will like lead you into that type of movement. And so that can happen in so many different ways, and so many different places have like some of those like signature moves, like the New River Gorge lock off.
Right.
You know what I mean? We're like practicing counterbalancing with our trailing foot as we lock off before we go to the new, or we're practicing mantling or like, hand foot matches. And so I really like to know where people are going for sure, because I think we can do so much better than just be like, basically, I think the original kind of climbing training that was written was like done in blocks, you know what I mean? And we introduced periodization, and this whole idea of training for 3 months before a trip, where did that come from? Like largely the Anderson Brothers training book.
Right.
Where we're like, we do a block of this and then a block of this and a block of this. And the periodization schemes might get a little bit more interesting, but in most of those, they aren't taking into account where you're at personally with those skills required for your trip. And so it will sometimes trip people up when I'm like, okay, you're going here, I want to teach you this skill. And then they're like doing it for longer than what they're used to in a block of training. Mm-hmm. And having to kind of be like, okay, where did that become the gold standard? And is that really appropriate for where you are at specifically? And sometimes it is. Sometimes I'm like, we need to work on this for another few weeks before we move on, and because I want you to like really have this like depth of understanding of skills that you might need in a place.
I'm curious how you work with clients if the client's remote, if you're not hanging out with them at the gym. Mm-hmm. How do you work on something as nuanced as movement?
So I do have in-person sessions at the Climb Clinic in Golden, Colorado. So like I will, if you're around there, like we can work with you that way. But basically we have a really robust skill work library that we've developed as coaches, where we like talk through a skill concept and give you examples, and then you go find it and work on it and send us videos. But a lot of it will just happen organically. I'll have somebody that wants to work on steeper stuff, and I'm like, all right, I want to see like videos of 5 to 7 V3s on a kilter board at 50 degrees, and I can and then they'll send them to me. And then from that, I'm like, okay, well, like I can, like sometimes I'll take screenshots and draw lines of tension that are breaking. Sometimes I will just record a Loom video, which is basically like a screen recording of me talking. And I'll kind of like back up and like be sharing with them what I'm seeing and then explain why I want them to try it a different way. Like what I try to do to the best of my ability is I try to like help them understand the overall arching like concept of movement that they're missing. And then also be like, so that's why I want you to try it this way instead of just being like, put your right foot here. You know what I'm like? I'm trying to explain the why so that way when they're out on their trip and they're at the crux, you know what I mean? They're like, okay, all right, I have like 7 ideas right now. Sick.
Yeah. And so when you do identify that, if you're reviewing videos of the client on the 50-degree kilter board, for example, you're identifying an area of improvement, a break in tension, or they could back flag or something like that. Do you then give them specific drills to help try to drive that skill that wasn't coming innately to them home, or are you climbing that same climb and showing them how you would do it? How do you then take it from like the theoretical, I understand what I've done wrong, to, okay, this is now a part of my toolkit?
Yeah. That is the really nice thing about training boards is that I can just be like, I'm just going to like tilt my board and I'm just going to do like these and I'm going to send them a video.
Yeah.
That happens a lot. That's not always the case. If somebody has a board that I don't have access, it depends on the situation. But yeah, like for example, just like simple getting better at steeper climbing, like dropping and popping, like I get a lot of athletes that have climbed a lot of vert and they will lock off everything to their waist. Right. And like we need to start introducing momentum into their climbing, and it doesn't mean they need to cut feet. And so like they'll spend 20 minutes like climbing something really statically and locked off, and then they'll do the climb again and they'll drop and pop and use like the plyometric action of that to feel how much easier that move can be, maybe if they're starting to move with momentum. And so it's a mixture, and it's so different for everybody. Some people are excellent at dropping and popping, so I'm not going to give them that. But usually in the course of me seeing athletes climb in their climbing assessment videos, I can kind of pull out like, oh, like we need a couple months maybe on this idea. And so it's like a combination of direct feedback on their climbing and then skills.
Well, I'd love to like actually peel back on some of this coaching skill and training nerdery if you're game, because I feel like
totally.
Foundationally, I think we've covered some really important and great concepts on trip planning. I got a lot of people who wrote in questions for you that are more just kind of general in like with regard to like becoming better climbers and coaching and training. And so if we've got a little bit of time here, I'd like to geek out over some of that. I guess before we kind of shift, and we may come back to some trip stuff as some of these concepts apply, but was there anything on specifically on trip planning that I didn't ask you about that's on your mind that we might want to cover here before we shift gears?
The only thing I'll say, I want to flip it to you, and I want to hear your 4 categories of goals for a trip that you have coming up.
This is good. I mean, you're going to make me kind of come up with some things on the fly here. Now, I don't have a specific trip planned yet, but on my list this year is getting down to Chattanooga to do some bouldering. One of my big goals this year is to push my bouldering grade. I'm quite averse to bouldering. I don't like taking ground falls. So, when you take the harness off of me, I get very scared and very timid. So let's look at this like theoretical bouldering trip that either will be to Chattanooga or to the Craft Boulders out in Vegas. Maybe both if I can fit it into the schedule, because Chat is a road trip and Vegas is a cheap flight. So
sure.
Yeah. And the last time I was out in Vegas, I was with Anna, and she made me climb a boulder without using my hands and barefoot. It was awful. It was just absolute torture. So
probably really good for you.
The next trip, I'm going to be able to use my hands on something. So for either of those trips, I think in terms of a goal, my overall goal this year is to, it's such a bold and likely unachievable goal. And Anna talked me into it. My original goal was to climb a V7. And she was like, but an 8 is so much more symmetrical. You should go for an 8. And I was like, well, what does that have to do with anything? So now anyway, the goal is V8. So yeah, we'll thank her for that. So the overall goal will be, and I haven't identified any boulders yet, would be like the boulder. But like there's a boulder in craft called the Pearl. It's a V5 that I got on and was just like absolute stopper. So maybe like let's use that as the example, because I think achieving my grade goal will likely be like on a systems board, just like at the gym here, since I'm not able to take a lot of trips. But let's say I want to go to craft. I want to climb the Pearl, which is the V5. That would be the send goal. The movement goal, I probably have to identify a little bit more as I like get into craft, but or into that boulder. But that boulder is more vertical and very thin. It's got like kind of very thin feet, very thin hands, and it's just not a style that I'm accustomed to. You know, typically I'm climbing very steep, kind of more juggy stuff at the red, or training on like a moon board or a TB2 that's like steep. So I'm not sure of the exact movement yet, but it's going to have to do, I think, with like probably some high stepping and just being comfortable and executing on like more vert kind of thin type stuff.
Yeah, maybe your movement goal could be like building intention with how much weight is in each limb.
Yeah,
You know,
I like
it's
that.
like if you're on really small holds, any amount of like change is going to affect how it feels. And then you make a move, and that's also going to like change, you know, weight in limbs or lines of tension. And so like you could just kind of like, you know, turn your attention to, like it doesn't have to be like you tick a box, but you're like paying attention to something like that.
I do like that. And I think I'm so used to at the red sagging away from the wall and just kind of like hanging on my bones and kind of like trying to rest my way up. And so it's still quite foreign for me to like pull close to a wall and like what kind of a vertical, like Smith Rock, I've never been there, but like that kind of style from what I understand, or on the specific boulder. So having that tension in each limb, trying to put a lot on my feet and not kind of sagging my butt away. That would be, I think, a good movement goal for me. And a community goal, God, every time I go out there, Alex Honnold crushes me in ping pong. And so I'd really like to beat his ass in ping pong. I think that's going to take some training because he's pretty good at ping pong. Anna and I actually played, the last time I was out there, we went over and played some pong with him, and he just mopped the floor. So I think that's going to be
a lot to take, honestly.
It's going to be a community goal. It's going to take some practice.
It's perfect, honestly. That's exactly what I'm talking about. Like,
Yeah.
that fits right in there. Yep.
And also I'd like to actually camp out there. Every time I go out there, I find like a place to crash, which is great because I've got friends out there, but it's so pretty. I'd like to maybe camp for a night and just like experience the stars. And then a mental goal. The mental goal for me with bouldering is definitely like being willing to go for it. Because I just, like I noted, there's a lot of fear around ground falls and just like impact. And I don't typically have that fear when I'm on a sport route. I've worked over many years to feel okay, like really going for it and taking big falls and skipping bolts and this kind of thing when, you know, if it serves the overall objective and it's safe and all that. But I do so little bouldering outdoors, there's definitely fear around like rolling an ankle or breaking something or hitting the ground, and like top outs are scary. So that's a mental goal. I'm not quite sure if you have some thoughts around how to work through that. I'd be grateful for it because I know it's holding me back, you know?
Yeah, and every boulder landing is different, but like I feel you have sublux and elbow and a bouldering fall is.
Oh God, you're not helping.
Sorry, but let me go to the helping part. Hold on, let's go. So sorry. I think in terms of the top outs, I think one of the biggest things that I have, like people, you get up to the top out and then you're like, oh my God, am I sending? And like, oh my God, now it's the top out. This is the scary part.
Right.
And like your thoughts start to go, they just like crank in their speed. Right. And like it's all of a sudden you're on a race to the top out. You don't know how you got into a race, but somehow now you're speed climbing.
Right.
You know what I mean? It like is, especially in like top outs where you're like, okay, like this isn't maybe the hardest thing, but like it's a little weird, or like I'm not the best at mantling. Is just like being able to slow down your thoughts. And like if you're bouldering and you're like, I'm guessing you're not going to be crazy pumped. Like I hope, you know, with the red background, like it's not like you're pumping out and you can like slow that down. Like, and it's going to feel like you slow it down like crazy, but really you just took 2 seconds to chill. You know what I mean? Is to like give yourself a second. Try to slow down your thoughts to a place where you can problem solve. Because I think so many times when people are like super like, we get super aroused, like our arousal level like psychologically is really, really high, is our thoughts start going so fast, we're no longer in the problem solving zone. You know what I mean? And there might be a foot right by your knee, or like you might just need to like, you know, like that kind of stuff happens when we're super keyed up like that. So trying to notice when your thoughts are speeding and then like try to just slow them down and give your a second to problem solve, I think would be great.
No doubt. I experienced that. And I don't know if you did this boulder in Leavenworth called Fridge Center, or the Fridge Boulder.
Yeah.
But like, I've got the video. It's hilarious. Like, I finally stick like this move where it's kind of like a little bit of a hand jammy ring lock move towards the top. And then, and then I kind of freak out because I stuck it. I'm like looking down at the pad. I'm like, am I going to jump? No. Okay. I'm still on the rock. And then
getting your foot up right there is kind of funky.
Yeah. Like getting the foot up. And then like, I just did this hilarious 4-minute beached whale where I'm just like, gradually half inch by half inch scraping my belly over the top of this thing. Cause I know that I could have probably put my foot up or grabbed the thing and made it look better. But like, I was so gripped and I was like, no, I think there's a way for me to inchworm my way to the top of this. So
I want to see that video.
I got the send. I mean, I got the
Hell
send.
Yeah.
But, it was not pretty.
Boulder.
It was not pretty, Carly.
That's actually, I have a video of me doing that boulder too, and I have like I like doing this like piano key thing with my fingers. I'm like inching further on the hold, and it's just kind of goofy. But the thing is like, it's different. Like, for sure, you know how to do that. If you climbed these like resistance routes in the red, you know when you get to the rest and you're just like, oh fucking shit, like all this stuff is going on, and like, and you have to calm yourself down and like fucking compose yourself. Like, you do have that skill. It just hasn't been put to bouldering yet. Yeah. So,
no doubt. Well, those are good. I mean, I appreciate you helping me identify my goals there. I'm going to write them down. I do well with writing down, so I'm going to write them down in my journal here. And when I go on the trip, I'll report back. And I'll report back.
I'm going to be curious to how having all 4 like changes your interaction with your trip.
It already feels, it's the craziest thing, but like, I already feel lighter, honestly, just talking about that. I've felt like I've put a lot of pressure on myself to send things, you know, this whole big thing to send my first 13A, and I made podcasts about it, and it was very public, and I really enjoyed the process. It was super, super great, but it was kind of singularly focused on the send. And so just to even talk theoretically, as we just did, about these other goals that can come from a trip or just over the course of my year, it's really nice. It's like already kind of, it feels like I've taken like a little bit of a weight off my chest. So I appreciate that.
I'm glad. That's good.
Cool. Well, let's take a few minutes here to get to some of these things that listeners have written in. And this is a lot about kind of favorite modalities of training. I've got like a few different categories here. And so I'll just maybe press you for some specific ideas, but specific ways to improve one's movement skills came up a few times. And we did just talk about that a little bit, like how you work with a client. But for those who are self-coached, are there certain drills or I don't know, things that we can think about when we're going to the gym next that help to improve movement? And I know movement's like a massive bucket. If you want to just like focus on like 1 or 2 things that you think are important for climbers to focus on, we can do that.
Yeah, totally. Okay, so I'll just give a few ones that have like been common that I've seen lately, and maybe hopefully that kind of applies then. So I think in terms of tools, if you are like, I want to learn how to move more dynamically, I think the kilter board is like the best tool for that, because it's like more comfortable. You don't have to be like cranking your fingers till they cry. You know what I mean? You can learn a lot about hip trajectory and momentum and that type of movement. So like, you know, if that's you're like I climb vert tech and I hate it when it's 50 degrees overhanging and I don't know how, like, the kilter board is a great tool. On the flip side, if you're like, I am a hoss and like I can do 1-arm lock off, but I'm struggling on my like resistance or anything with small feet, you know, like the tension board too is great. So sometimes it can be as like simple as like, if you are really good at dynos and you're struggling on resistance 512s, you know what I mean? The kilter board is that's not what you need. You need something that's going to challenge you in a different way. And so Like often the simplest movement coaching advice is like, what are you avoiding? What are you naturally not good at is like going and seeking it out. So I think that's like one really good like blanket statement. If you are working on the kilter, working on bit steeper, more dynamic movements, is instead of thinking about making the move and just like taking a hold, is like think about the lines of tension that you're drawing with your body that are changing as you go up a kilter problem. You know, it might be your right foot and your left foot. You make a move. Now it's a cross body line of tension. You know what I mean? You do a pogo, but you have to catch with both hands because you can't let that backhand totally release. You're going to fly into the wall. You know, that's your new line of tension. And so just start to think about your climbing and where you're holding these lines of tension or you're dropping them, I think is like a good thing for folks to look at.
And how do we know if our tension is failing?
That's really good. So like one of the telltale signs of somebody's like going up for a big move is like by the time they get to the move, their foot, knee, ankle, or butt has already started to move away from the wall.
Okay.
And so they go up and they hit maybe they even go up and they like hit the move. But like then I see like the rest of their body is like unable to, I say draw the line of tension between their hand and their foot, but like you can see part of their body will like hinge.
Right. So you're starting to sag away maybe or something like that. I mean, that's probably happened to all of us who are listening right now. Like if I'm making a move on a steep board or something like that, and either, I mean, in the biggest sense, like the foot will pick off and I'll just like swing out and totally lose. But otherwise, like maybe the toe is in there, but I hit the hold and very often I can see myself like sagging away from it, the butt sagging away or the whole back or whatever. So that's, you're indicating there, like essentially there's some sort of break. I wasn't keeping tension somewhere in my body during that move.
Yep. And that like it might change depending on the person. So like that's something that it's really nice to have video because I'll be able to like very easily like pull what happened there. Another thing to look at, and this kind of goes into the same line, is the timing of your hip trajectory. So this will go into like, sometimes I'll see people's hips, they'll hit the top of the movement like a full second before their hands hit the top of the movement. And so there's a mistime. And so that's why, so you'll like see, it's hard with like not to have like a specific video on there, like since we're not looking at a video, is all the different things that you can do with your hip drive when you get on steeper terrain and trying to the best of your ability, like your hips hit the top of their sort of journey at the same time that your hand hits the hold. And so it's all moving together. And like when we get on really steep terrain, and if we're used to climbing really vert terrain, the tendency of folks is to be like drive their hips into the wall first and then reach. And that works really well intensely, or like that kind of thing where you need to be close to the wall. But when you're going to steeper terrain, your hip timing will often change. And so starting to be curious about that and notice, am I driving my hips into the wall and then a full second later I hit the hold, and by that time everything's falling away. Yeah.
Gosh, that makes a lot of sense the way you just explained that, because I can see how that happens. Like if the hips finish their journey first, by the time the hand hits, then the hits are already starting to come back.
Yeah,
like
exactly.
And you want to essentially arrive at the destination at the same time, kind of a perfect dead point, so that tension can hold. Yeah, cool.
Exactly.
Oh,
exactly.
You've given me some good things to work on.
Yeah, good. Yeah, and I think the like hip trajectory and like all of the 3D movement, all of those discussions are so fun for us to have and like so interesting to dig into. And like we all, like me included, have movement patterns that we're better at and movement patterns that we're worse at. And like I think if you are trying to get better at climbing, you should know which ones that you're not. Like I can tell you right now, like I'm not that great at recycling momentum. Like connecting moves through recycled momentum is pretty hard for me. And I'm not very good at like catching holds above my head in like that aren't in a Gaston. So like the opposite of a Gaston position. Those like two moves for me, I know that they are like I will Gaston everything. I love Gaston. So like I'm really strong in that, right?
Right.
But like if you flip it and it's going the other way, I'm struggling. And so when I'm like climbing, if I find a problem that really highlights that, even if it's a V5, but it's like, oh, that's that move, you know, that I know I'll avoid it if I can, then I'll be like, sick, let's like run that a few times. Like it's not my limit project, right? But like how cool will it be when I find that on a limit boulder and I'm like, oh, I've gotten to practice this not only on a limit boulder.
I like that. There's discomfort around that. It's certainly like mentally and emotionally going to the gym and like essentially climbing a limit thing that isn't grade wise like what your limit is. But to your point earlier, therein lies the opportunity for improvement. Cool. Okay. So that's movement. I had a couple people write in about finger strength. And of course, that's just like everybody's favorite thing to talk about.
Everybody loves
anything ever is finger strength. And, it was interesting. Kelsey wrote in and said, how actually important are strong fingers on a hangboard compared to strong fingers as a climber, where I'm also able to use my feet and everything else as part of my body. A couple other people wrote in and asked about like, what are your favorite ways to train fingers at home versus at a gym or at the crag? So I don't know, a whole bucket, some nice warm stew of finger strength talk for you here. What are your thoughts on that? We can answer Kelsey's question first if you'd like, in terms of like the importance of strong fingers, maybe like objectively measuring them like max hangs versus just like the applicability of it.
Totally. I think finger strength's probably one of the most talked about things. And without going into a whole spiel, we did look at that from a statistical analysis point of view a couple of years ago. I don't know if and there's like a article in Climbing Mag.
Yeah, I remember that.
And because it's so common, like I have the finger strength is one of the number one things that somebody like comes to me and they want to work on, and it is important. And like I do think there is some like kind of baseline, like I want you to be able to hang a 20 mil. I want you to be able to depending on where you're at and you're climbing. And there are some like basics where like, yeah, we want that skill. And I call it that skill, because you want to know how to hang on and feel comfortable and confident in those positions. But if you looked at like the study that we did, which was corroborated by somebody with a PhD in stats, like the finger strength is like a lot less important than how much we talk about it. And it's a little more important in bouldering for sure. But like looking at sport climbing, and I don't have it with me exactly, but it was like the correlation was like below 0.2 on like finger strength to max sport grade. And like things that were playing a much bigger role were days on rock, and it is an imperfect study because days on rock includes so much.
Right.
That's head game, that's skills. Like this is like a preliminary look at this, but I do think it's interesting of like a lot of, there was like over 600 people in this study and we're still collecting data on it right now on our website, is like, it was way less important than even I thought it was going to be. So it's something that I think we want to continue to develop, but we want to continue to like build it. And that's great. But in 98% of the people that I coach, I've taken people from like V3 to V7 and their max hang has gone up like 5 pounds.
Wow.
You know what I mean? And it's because of that there's like these movement things that they're strong. Like a lot of times they're strong. They just are like, there's some like fundamental lack of like connection between like what they can do on a hangboard and what they can do with their body. And so I think continuing to be on a hangboard is great, and everybody in a way that at a volume that your body and your fingers can adapt to. That's like great. And as you get into like more advanced like bouldering and like things get like really hard, the advice on this might change a little bit, but like for probably 90% of the listeners, I'm like, yes, totally continue to build your finger strength. And I think a 20 mil or 30 or 20 mil or 15 mil on a hangboard is a great way to do that, or a pinch block or a sloper hang. But if you feel like you have improve your finger strength and your climbing is not getting any better, that's when it's time to look at the movement side of things.
This is actually like really good news for me. I feel like, because I'm with my bouldering grade goal now that Anna has set for me from
Yes.
V5 to V8. You're saying that there may be some opportunity. You haven't seen me climb. I haven't done a video analysis with you yet, but I feel like there may be more for me to unlock on the movement side than I'm giving credit, because in my mind I'm like, okay, I got to get stronger, and I am, I think, relatively speaking, weak for the grade, if you will. But maybe I don't need to get that much stronger. Maybe I just need to get that much better.
What is your max hang on a 20 mil?
I just did it. I added 67.5 pounds, and I'm 155 pounds. God, whatever that is, I don't know what it is.
Yeah.
It's 2 hands.
Okay.
There's room
Yeah, and
for
I mean-
improvement. Let me say that, because I can do like on a 2-arm weighted pull-up, 2-rep max, I can do like 155%. And like my endurance is very good. I think I'm a slow twitch guy, but yeah, no doubt there's room for improvement, I think, on like my max hang. But yeah, I don't know. What do you say?
I would not like tell you like don't improve your finger strength anymore. But if we look at like how much time have you spent outdoor bouldering and learning those skills to how much time you spent on a hangboard, I can tell you that if you spend like 20 days outdoor bouldering compared to 20 days on the hangboard, which one's going to make your climbing better without like, I can, it's the one where
Right.
you haven't done it, right? It's just like I think you would totally benefit from continuing to increase your finger strength. But I think that like trip to Vegas where you go on boulder and you go boulder like a bunch of different things and you do the pearl and you work some harder things and you do it with friends and talk about beta, and like see how they do it, see how you do it. Why does that feel better? Like all those questions probably hold more for you right now in this snapshot in time, probably hold more than like you hanging 20 more pounds on the hangboard.
Yeah, no doubt. And it'll be a lot more fun because it'll be like out
And
climbing.
it'll probably be a freaking great time. Too.
Yeah.
It'll be good. Yeah. I feel like we all have this like progression wheel that we're going through where like, yeah, it's totally strength and then it's movement and then it's endurance and then it's something else. And then you come back to strength and we roll through it. But I do think I'm like 100% with Anna, like since you haven't done much outdoor bouldering, I think you're going to be really psyched to see what spending some time on that does for your sport climbing.
Oh, I'm excited. Well, thank you, Carly. I appreciate that. Yes. We got more questions, but I think we'll save them because we're running up on time here. But let's do like a follow-up with you after you send your proj or not, but tick other goals from your 4-quadrant goal list out there. And
cool.
This has been a joy. Now, if people want to work with you or work with the other coaches at Project Direct, what is the best way for them to get in touch?
So on our website, and this is also like in our link tree on our Instagram, we have like a new athlete sign up and waitlist form. So we're booking out into April. For me, May or June, but for like all of our coaches, like April timeframe. So if you're interested in working with us, the way it works is you go to the new athlete intake form, ask you some basic questions so we can get like an idea of kind of what you're looking for and what you're struggling with, what you want to improve on and your goals. And so from that, then we schedule a free call with you. So a free 30-minute call with the coach that you want to work with, because I think it's important to, got to make sure the vibe's right. You know? Like everybody's got their own personalities, and our whole point is not to like force you to work with a certain coach. It's to help find the coach that like you guys click. And so then you can have a call with the coach and then you can save a spot from there. And that's kind of how but it's like a wait list since we are booking out like at least 4 months. So our website is projectdirectcoaching.com, and then there's just like a little waitlist button at the top of the website. You can add your name and fill out that form. Or if you go to our Instagram page, projectdirect_coaching, and click on the link tree, that same link is in there too. So you can fill that out, and that's kind of the best way because then that leads us to have a conversation, which is, such an important part and so much of coaching.
Cool. Well, I'll also make it easy for listeners, and I'll put those links right there in the show notes so you can just click right through and have a conversation with somebody over there if you want. And Carly, thanks for your time. This is exciting. I'm excited to plan some trips, and El Salto sounds sick, so I'm going to have to add that to the list at some point in time as well.
It's a really special place to me. The climbing is incredible, but there's a goodness about this place that keeps bringing me back.
Ah, cool. Well, good luck. Have so much fun out there, and give Anna my love.
I definitely will.
Yeah, you guys are roomies for a bit.
We are. We're scheming all sorts of things.
Oh, good. I hope we get to see some more funny videos where you teach her how to use a faucet and an outlet.
Right now, I'm just more trying to convince her to use the knee bars that are on the roof. So once we get that, achieved, and I force her to bring that knee pad up with her, then we'll work on more household and other domestic goddess things.
All right, y'all, that wraps things up with Coach Carly Rager. I really, really enjoyed this conversation. I hope you did too. There's so much more that we get out of climbing than just sending. That 4-goal paradigm that she laid forward has really changed the way that I look at climbing in general. We can go out for a day at the gym or a day at the crag, and the goal can be to send, but what about a mental goal? What about a movement goal? What about a community goal? I love that so much. And then everything else that she laid out. I'm really psyched for taking some trips, which I am going to be doing coming up here. Like I noted at the top of this episode, I'm going to be out in Portland in early March to film with Emil Abrahamson and do a little climb around and a live podcast. So if you're in that area, stay tuned / hit me up, and I'd love to see you out there. Also, you heard Carly talking about Anna there, her roomie in Mexico. Anna and I are about to record a crag chat, and that'll be coming out at the end of the month here. So we'll check in on Carly's progress on her project as well as Anna's on her. They're both making super big moves down there in Mexico. I'm crazy inspired by both of them. Obviously, they are very strong climbers, but they also like to have a lot of fun. And so do I. And so do you, I think. So stay tuned for the crag chat. And if you want to work with Carly, it sounds like she's got a little bit of a full dance card, but I'm going to put her link down there in the show notes for her and her team at Project Direct. Shoot them a message. You can do that free 30-minute consult and see if it's a good fit for what you're looking to do. And I hope you are having a friggin' blast. This winter / spring is right around the corner. Let's go. And hey, if you got a second, let me just ask one little thing before I send it over to our full outro. If you've got a second and you're enjoying this show, if you haven't rated it yet or reviewed it yet on Apple or on Spotify, you would be shocked how big of an impact that actually makes. So if you could just take like 10 seconds, the episode is now done. Take 10 seconds wherever you are listening to my voice right now to hopefully give me a 5-star review. If you feel like I don't deserve a 5-star review, it actually hurts me to get 4 stars. That's how well reviewed the show is. So instead of reviewing it for less or rating it for less, just shoot me a message. Let me know what it would take to earn 5 stars, and I'll try to do that for you. But if you do like it and you like me, I'd really appreciate 5 stars and a nice word on Apple, because you can leave like a little written review there. And that makes a big difference. Okay, thank you so much. I love you. Now, if you'd like to see the uncut video of this chat, plus score instant access to more than 100 hours of amazing bonus content, and I'm talking about episodes with the likes of Adam Andra, Hazel Finley, Alex Honnold, Magnus Mitbo, Chris Sharma, Allison Vest, and so many more amazing athletes and coaches, well, you can get it all right now for about the price of a beer each month. And I gotta tell you, I could go for a beer right now because I've been working really hard out here in the podcast / utility closet. So if you are in a position to buy me one of those ice cold beers, it would be so rad. There's also a free trial happening right now, so if you want to date me a little bit before you buy me that beer, I get it. You can listen to all that bonus content for free and then stick around if you like it. Just swing on over to patreon.com/The Struggle Climbing Show to get access to that full library right now. Or if you're an iPhone person, you can subscribe right there in your Apple podcast player. Thank you so much. Huge thanks and appreciation to our show sponsors who have brought you this episode at zero cost. Check your show notes for the links and special discounts to those brands that are only available to Struggle listeners. And by the way, you can see all of the show's awesome sponsors and special deals by just popping over to thestruggleclimbing.com/deals. Hey, did you know that The Struggle's carbon neutral in partnership with the Honnold Foundation? They are just doing amazing work to bring clean energy to communities around the world. You can get inspired by their latest grant recipients over at honnoldfoundation.org, and then just toss them some love if you can, even a few bucks a month. They're doing such cool and impactful work. And lastly, The Struggle is a proud member of the Plugtone Audio Collective, a diverse group of the best, most impactful podcasts in the outdoor industry. This show was produced and hosted by me, Ryan Devlin, and edited by Glen Walker. All right, that clips the anchors on this episode. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you liked it, and if you like this show just in general, would you consider sharing it with your climbing friends? The more who listen, the closer that I will get to making this my full-time gig, which would be so cool. So thank you in advance for sharing this episode and also rating and reviewing it if you got a hot second. Really appreciate you. I hope your training and your climbing are going great. And if you're struggling like me, well, at least the struggle makes us stronger. I'll see you soon.